Ooh, hello. Next day, sticking to the deal, whatever. I have to leave in 20 something minutes to 25 minutes maybe to get to the train station to go to the airport to go back to Lisbon. But I started thinking about this morning and I can't not record this now. I believe yesterday, maybe, or I woke up this morning to a couple of texts talking about how Trump has invaded Iran. Not invaded, but, done nasty stuff to Iran. And I couldn't help but not care that much. There is a component to Iran being a dictatorial state and me being generally pro-regime change, but I don't think, or that's not the primary cause of my apathy or ambivalence to this issue. There were news yesterday, or for the past week, that has completely dominated my mind in terms of international relations or even just the security of the world or the state of the world for the coming future. As you may well know, AI has been, some would say catastrophic, others would say a force for good, but it's definitely had an impact over the last couple of years. Ever since probably 2022, since the first LLMs started getting pumped out, late 2022. Because up until then, AI is a broad, silly umbrella term. I mean, it can refer to a lot of things. There's technically has always been AI since we've had like algorithmic feeds, and even before then with simple neural networks that have existed for ages, which then transformed into deep neural networks. There's a whole AI is a whole thing that's existed for a long time, but LLMs were truly, I believe, a categorical shift in how the economy works, how the military operates in our day-to-day lives, which AI, I believe, hasn't impacted or hasn't had that strong of an impact until now. Whatever. The big news is that the Pentagon issued an order to Anthropic, who are the producers of Claude, one of the state-of-the-art models out there. I would say Claude is probably state-of-the-art for coding. They're probably the top for coding, but they also have a military contract with the Pentagon, with the US government, because they think they're the best or whatever. Claude, or Anthropic, also seems to be, from my limited experience, from my limited perspective, the biggest force for good in the AI space. I mean, they, I believe, are leading in terms of AI safety research. They have a whole alignment team. I think they seem generally pretty committed to AI being a force for good, whereas X doesn't seem to have that commitment, or at least their notion of good is very different, and I believe not aligned with the rest of humanity's notion of good. Now, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, gave an ultimatum to Claude, saying that if by the 5 p.m., I think it was 5:01 Eastern Time, on the 27th of February, if they didn't remove all restrictions on Claude, there would be consequences. And I believe the two major consequences that Hegseth laid out was that they would start classifying Claude, or maybe even Claude, as a national security risk, which would of course cause major supply chain collapse, or at least major difficulties. The last time I think they did this was for Huawei. They usually only do this for foreign entities that potentially do pose a national security risk, but of course this government doesn't really care about precedent. And they would call on the Defense Production Act. I believe the This act was primarily used during the Korean War, but this allows the government to mandate certain things from companies. For example, I think the last time the U.S. government used this was during COVID for mask production, where they mandated certain companies to mass produce masks, and they said they would issue this as maybe an executive order, just a national order, to Anthropic to almost seize Claude, which of course would be insane. Now, I don't believe this is like a full nationalization, but it is definitely strong government intervention in a publicly traded company, which of course is insane and unprecedented at this scale and for these reasons. The two things that Anthropic replied to the Pentagon. This is, I believe, how the chain of events worked out. I don't know if this is fully factually true, so fact check me. But the way the Anthropic replied to the Pentagon was by saying that there were two things they would not concede on, or there were two protections that they would not remove on Claude. The first was Claude being used in fully autonomous weapons. So they demanded that there must always be a human in the loop anytime Claude is being used for autonomous weapons. They can still be used for autonomous weapons, just not fully autonomous weapons, which I think is an important distinction. Right? We've had autonomous weapons for a long time now, but I don't believe, maybe Israel has, but I don't believe we use fully autonomous weapons as like daily drivers in the government. I don't in war, and I don't believe that they are widespread. And secondly, they also said that Claude would not be allowed to be used for mass government surveillance. I think it's the Fourth Amendment that gives the government the right to survey their people for public security. For example, having cameras in public spaces. But there's always been this natural logistical limit to government surveillance, right? You can put a microphone in literally every single park bench. You can put cameras literally everywhere. But if you don't have people to sift through that data, and if you aren't able to actually make any sense of the data that you have in front of you, mass government surveillance isn't really possible. And of course, with the advent of AI, or just generally better AI, because like deep neural networks or any sort of machine learning or any sort of good pattern recognition done by machines kind of defeats this natural limit and makes mass government surveillance strongly possible thing, which is very problematic, of course. So Claude or Anthropic issued those two provisos, I guess, that they would not concede on. Now, of course, the Pentagon did not think this was good enough, because we live in a time like that, but the deadline passed. Anthropic, or the head of Anthropic, released he said something so cool in the email. Whatever. We can't in good consciousness cede. Whatever. I forgot what it was, but it's a banger. Oh, sorry. We cannot in good consciousness accede to the demands made by the Pentagon. So, before I start talking about the consequences of that, and generally my thoughts on all of this, it's important to state that OpenAI, Google, and X, which I believe are the three other American titans in the AI industry, have all said they would accede to the Pentagon's demands. Anthropic is the only company not acceding. I love that word. to the Pentagon's demands, which I think is very important to note. Now, there have been, I don't know if it's just petitions or there's just been a lot of chatter, and I think genuine noise makes it sound trivial. Sorry, my brain's not working. There's been momentum, I guess, being generated by staff of these other big three, probably less X, but Google and OpenAI, that state that they stand with Anthropic's decision. And I think that's really important because, remember, a company isn't just their CEO, it's also the staff. So I guess this is how I'm coping with this news, and how I will still use OpenAI's products, namely Codex, to help with programming, and Gemini to help with more daily driver LLM tasks. But it is I think abundantly clear that Anthropic seems to be the more aligned company in the United States currently. Now, there have been what I have found to be 5 major consequences to this, and I've taken notes on these, so I might just read these out. Number 1, supply chain risk designation. Defense Secretary, what's a chief of war? I'm just going to read this. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth officially designated Anthropic as supply chain risk to national security. This label, which is typically reserved for foreign adversaries like Huawei, effectively blacklisted the company from working in the U.S. military. That and the contract termination, the Pentagon is moving to terminate its existing $200 million contract with the company. Those aren't career-ending, generally, for a company that I believe has a market cap of multi-billions or multiple billions of dollars. I don't think that will be career-ending, and I don't think that will be corporate suicide for Anthropic. However, there has also been a commercial activity ban. The Pentagon issued a directive prohibiting any military contractor, supplier, or partner from conducting commercial activity with Anthropic. That's a little bigger than supply chain risk designation. But also there's been a federal use ban. President Trump ordered all federal agencies to immediately cease the use of Anthropic technology. A 6-month phase-out period has been established for agencies currently using its product, and there's been threat of legal/executive compulsion. Officials have threatened to invoke the Defensive Production Act, the DPA, which I previously mentioned, to compel Anthropic to provide access to its technology without a contract. President Trump further warned of major civil and criminal consequences if the company does not cooperate during phase-out. I believe Anthropic has also been talking about issuing lawsuits to fight against the DPA, the Defensive Production Act. I'm not sure if they have, but again, this is very new, so I'm not in the business of breaking news. Like I don't think that is interesting, but this is especially very important for what I believe this is, or what I believe the broader context surrounding this is. Okay, so let's actually talk about thoughts and opinions and consequences of this, because all of this is just like descriptive. Okay, what is happening? What has been happening? I think when AI first came around, because of my general optimism for technology, and general optimism for life, but also my love of technology, I heard these technofeudalism arguments, and I always thought they were a little academic. They were a little out of touch with reality, and they were a little pessimistic, maybe dystopian. It is really hard to now look at those technofeudalism arguments with the same perspective. I think it's a misstep to at least blanketly ignore them and maybe even see them as impossible. How do I phrase this? Talk a little bit about international relations, okay? There's this concept called the polarity of the world. I didn't do international relations, okay? I barely took a class in the US about this. I'm not well versed in these topics, but there's this big topic in international relations which discusses the polarity of the world. For example, prior to World War II, I believe we lived in a multipolar world where the polarity of power, where most power is held, was kind of dispersed. Maybe concentrated in Europe, I don't know. I'm not interested in World War II history. However, at the end of World War II, the polarity of the world kind of split in half, with the Soviet Union holding half of the power of the world and the United States holding the other half. Where they were both titans, and that was the Cold War, right? The Iron Curtain, which wasn't really... whatever. So yeah, these two guys beefing. And then eventually, when the Soviet Union collapsed and America took over as the global superpower, the world became very unipolar, with all of the power essentially lying in the America. Fuck Canada. In the United States. I love Canada, sorry. Sometimes people think I'm Canadian, whatever. All of the power suddenly became concentrated in the United States, which led to what I believe is a period of prosperity, at least for the West. I'm very Western-brained, so I might be a little oblivious to the Eastern stuff, but whatever. There is... I think there is something to say about a unipolar world being a more peaceful world, where when all the power lies with, maybe to caveat that, a benevolent, which I believe the United States is generally, or at least was, a benevolent global superpower, they get to police the world, and as long as the police are cool and chill and nice, then everything turns out well. And it seems that living in a multipolar world is kind of recipe for chaos. I guess you can kind of use Hobbes in this example, where, you know, we live in the state of nature where everyone is equal, and because of everyone's equality and a scarcity for resources, there is a constant state of war where people constantly killing each other and going after each other and fighting each other. I believe that's an example, or a great example of that is World War II, or maybe even the multipolarity that existed. But in the medieval period, I think maybe, again, I might be completely butchering this, and any historian might be screaming at the screen or whatever. But, and again, I'm not highly educated on this topic. This is all just spitballing of random things that I've picked up throughout my years. But it seems that, for example, when the Roman Empire was the superpower in Europe, we had Pax Romana, right? Which was decades, maybe even centuries, I'm not sure, of peace, because we lived in a unipolar world. But when the Roman Empire split, or for example, another good example is Alexander the Great, and his empire was very unipolar, right? The power lay strictly in Alexander the Great's hands, and everyone else didn't really, they were getting mogged, okay, by Alexander the Great. But eventually, when he died, and because he left no heir, the massive split happened that fragmented his empire, and we went from a very unipolar empire, we went from a very unipolar space to a very multipolar space, where you had generals and potential heirs or whatever all fighting for the power vacuum that was left by Alexander the Great. And I think power vacuum in that sense isn't the correct word, because it's not like the power disappeared, but the power was dispersed. It's almost that power was in the state of entropy, where, you know, it was everywhere. It was chaotic, and it wasn't concentrated in one place. And I believe that's what gives rise to conflict, at least in my, again, very limited experience. Sorry, I'm hedging a lot, but I want to clarify that I'm not very confident discussing these things, but the multipolarity of the world causes a lot of conflict. And I think that we're seeing a rise of maybe at least, so when, I think it was called the Hellenistic period, right? When Alexander the Great's empire popped and got destroyed, and it was entropied and was everywhere, and then we lived in this very multipolar world, and that's where like Stoicism was born, for example. So I think there is some truth, or personally, in my opinion, I do think there is some truth to unipolarity being good, as long as it's with the good guys, in air quotes. And I think that I think that only goes so far. When we look at feudalism, for example, back in the day, and we zoom in and hold a state, for example, let's say the Russian kingdom. I think that's the only kingdom that I really have any awareness of. Or let's take a typical average medieval kingdom, okay, which I think is crazy to say, because I know the medieval, it was like centuries, and I think a lot changed during that period. But let's say an average kingdom, like let's call it Kingdom A, that king, if tyrannical, definitely holds. That kingdom is definitely unipolar, right? The power is strictly held within the king's hands. And I think that can be used for tyranny. I think that, but I'm not sure if the whole polarity stuff starts working when we look at only one nation state, but it should work, right? Because systems kind of don't really change depending on the size, but whatever. I think that this Hobbesian state of nature that we arrive to with multipolarity is very dangerous, but also the Leviathan, the single hyper unipolar world, is also super dangerous. I think one of the reasons why the unipolarity of America post World War II was peaceful and why we didn't see a lot of war up until recently, with I would say a little more bipolarity going towards China and Russia, the polar the polar center of the world starting to shift more to the east. But I think why the unipolar, the strong unipolar American hegemony period was so peaceful or so prosperous is because America still relied on its allies. Part of America's dominance, part of America's power comes from the network of relationships it develops. The military bases in every single country expands the American arms throughout the world. The concentration of, for example, NATO. NATO is another example of alliances that give America its power. I strongly believe, again, hedging the confidence thing in this whole topic, but I strongly believe that if America lost all of its allies, lost Europe, and distanced itself completely, for example, what it tried to do with Greenland, I think that would be the beginning of the end of the United States. The United States has a mega-developed tech tree. They do have a mega-developed military, okay? They've been spamming troops. But a lot of their power also comes from, for example, the US dollar being the world currency, right? All trade happening with the US dollar also gives America a lot of global power, right? Their debt ceiling could be stretched even further because they are the world's reserve currency. All of these things, generally, it seems that America's power doesn't only come from within, but it's also because other people recognize its power, right? These alliances and relationships, which is a unipolar system, but it's kind of like a democracy, almost, in a sense, right? So the power does lie with the state, but the people also have power. If tomorrow America decided to invade Greenland, the EU, Europe generally, and maybe even Asian countries, or Eastern countries, have the ability to toss all U.S. government bonds and tank, or at least severely hurt the American economy, cause a massive debt crisis. You know, they still have this soft power that they can engage with. But going back to the Anthropic thing, what we're seeing now with the rise of American dominance in AI is that AI seems to be a crucial factor or a crucial component of the global supply chain. It's still not very fast. I think we still have a global economy without AI. I think if AI disappeared tomorrow, we wouldn't see complete societal collapse. But we're getting there. We're getting to the point where we are changing our infrastructure to rely on AI even more and more every single day. And it seems that China's kind of competing. China's doing a good job. I mean, some of the open source models that are coming out of China, namely DeepSeek, but also what's coming out of the Alibaba group and stuff like that, are insane. I think they're kind of keeping pace. They're a little behind, but you know, it's an AI race still. They haven't been. It's not like they've been just completely gapped. But I think a fundamental player that we're not seeing on the field is Europe. I mean, we have Mistral, right? The French open source model, which I think gets completely crushed by the Americans and Chinese. I don't even think that's a race. I don't see any American frontier model being developed at all. And nobody cares. I feel like nobody's discussing this. I haven't seen this anywhere. Again, I'm not in like these very international relations circles, but we're talking a lot about our dependence on arms and our dependence on defense on the United States, but I don't hear the tech problem come up. I don't hear that in maybe 5 years, European companies will be solely dependent on American models or Chinese models, which I believe creates such a dangerous dynamic, because it takes us from that unipolar democratic world where, we still have a global superpower, which at this time currently is not good, but I generally still believe in the American project and the American, well, maybe with the whole media apparatus that exists now and the whole media environment, maybe that's finished, but that's for another conversation for another day. But the unipolarity of America with the reliance on alliances is stable, and it seems that it's good. However, that's being heavily, not limited, but threatened by this rise of what I believe is technofeudalism. I think generally technofeudalism is discussed in a more nation-state kind of way. For example, like you have these companies that are the techno-feudalists, or the CEOs of these companies, or the owners of these companies, however you want to frame it. I don't know if corporate entities are generally the feudal lords, but whatever. Let's just say corporate entities are the feudal lords, and the people are the serfs. But I think that's definitely a threat. I strongly believe that now. But I think a parallel threat is the threat of techno-feudalism at a international scale, where we have America and China become the feudal lords and the rest of countries on Earth become serfs to those countries. If America holds an insane grip on the European supply chain, we essentially become cucked to America. We have to do whatever America says, because with a correct president, or I guess in this case, incorrect president, the power could be gained over those supply chains. For example, Anthropic being seized by the DPA and cause calamity in Europe, cause collapse of supply chain. Imagine if tomorrow all access to, let's say Claude is the dominant model in most European enterprises, Claude just gets cut off. Your tokens aren't being valid anymore. There's no API calls. Everything's limited. It's like a Faraday cage around Claude. Your system tanks. I don't know how you recover from that without having your own strong models. So, again, I do believe... Oh, I'm going to miss this first train. But I do believe... It's 27 minutes, whatever. I'll get the next one. Hopefully I won't be late. I won't miss my flight. But I do believe we live in a world where every single day that goes by, the threat of the stable and prosperous world that we seem to be living in, up until maybe 2020, okay? So, but it seems that the stability of the world is being strongly threatened by this rise of techno-feudalism, both at a national sense and maybe even a psychological and sociological independent sense of when you look at humans or society as like these structures, but also in this international safety level, in this international... Yeah, at the international level. And, with the news about Iran, that's going to be what's going to be on the news. People don't understand what techno-feudalism is. I don't think most people understand what feudalism is. And the fear is, I don't know if I think my greatest fear is, I don't think we have world leaders that are equipped to deal with this paradigm shift that is occurring at both the national and the international level. And I don't see that changing anytime soon because of the systems that govern our political consciousness, namely media. I'm a very optimistic person. Very, very optimistic person, especially when it comes to tech. But this scares me. And like genuinely, like if I think throughout history, humans have proven to be incredibly adaptable. We have survived famines, floods. We've survived natural disasters. I mean, we've survived everything. But I think human adaptability takes time. And every day that goes by, it seems that time becomes more and more scarce. And my fear is that the next time we have to survive something, we will not have time to adapt. I don't know if we'll be able to adapt our way out of technofeudalism or this upcoming paradigm shift that's going to be caused by the technological changes that we're seeing. I don't know. All I do know is that I have to catch a flight now to go back home. And I'm going to watch Smallville on the plane. Okay. Anyways, we're sticking to this. And that's good. Consistency is key, right? So this video done. Maybe I'll film one when I get home. Probably not. I don't have to. And I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, and as I said, this won't necessarily be all about self-improvement or whatever. This is, like, I'm also interested in more than those things. Maybe I'll even make a video on guitar and music and art tomorrow, maybe. Anyways, I still haven't finished my website. I did put a hard cap on my flight home, but I think I'm gonna give myself one more day to work on the website, which I know is some sort of negotiation, and I think maybe if I did know there was gonna be a super, super hard ceiling, I would have finished it by now, but I think the introduction of this project took up a lot of time yesterday, and without it, I could have finished it, but I think all in all, it's better that I started this project and I give myself one more day to work on the website. I think at the end of the day, it's a net positive, even though I did change the contract with myself a little bit. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. I keep saying that. I don't know why I keep saying that, because you're not watching. You're not watching. You're not real. I'm not real.